3.32 billion people in the world play video games, according to Google. That's just under half the entire planet. But that doesn't mean half the planet knows what you're talking about when you try and share a fun indie game you played. So a mother receives a message from God demanding the life of her son as proof of her faith, and her son, fearing for his life, flees into the monster-infested basement where he must fight to survive.
Do you remember Space Invaders?
Binding of Isaac is a classic roguelike, and arguably one of the most important games over the last 2 decades to establish a genre that is still going strong today, with games like Vampire Survivors. It's a top-down adventure game where you fight monsters, pick up currency, and improve your character over the course of a run. When you die, the levels are procedurally generated, and you get new variants to start the next run. It's got the most bonkers plot presented by these drawings that make it feel ever more sinister.
Grabbing a butcher's knife from the kitchen. Isaac, watching through a crack in his door, trembled in fear.
Some of the villains are also particularly gruesome, and there's feces everywhere. So it's a date novel, and you join a high school literature club where 4 girls fight for your attention, and it's a mystery as to which girl you'll end up with romantically. But then things get really weird.
I used to play a lot of Mario Kart.
Doki Doki Literature Club is a visual novel game. That in its own right is quite confusing because it's not really a game, but a book with a couple of player choices. Sort of like Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventure book. Gotta love those. But this one's got girls in it that seem to be fighting each other for your attention. Obviously not a very accurate representation of my time in school, but I'm sure someone can relate. Your best friend Sayori convinces you to join an after-school club, the Literature Club. As you stay there, you get to know the girls and play a minigame where you sort of make up a poem. Spoiler warning, if you haven't played Doki Doki Literature Club and don't want to have the plot spoiled, skip to this time code. I'll give you a few seconds to decide whether to skip or keep watching. Okay, we can continue now. A few days in, your best friend Sayori starts behaving erratically, producing some of the weirdest poems you've ever read, until eventually you discover that she The game sort of restarts, but Sayori is no longer around. It's as if she's never existed. You carry on like a trooper until more and more things start to suddenly unravel around you. I've been relatively vague by that initial twist because if you have any sort of interest in the game, based on what I've said, you should really watch someone play it or play it for yourself.
The man stood paralysed in terror. The purple monster had been sharing dozens of game recommendations, each as equally or more wild than the one before. He takes a sip of his drink. Come now, it's just a drink. And who knows, maybe being absolutely blasted will make this conversation a little more entertaining.
The Stanley Parable was a concept only possible in gaming. It's a narrative love story where you play as Stanley, whose job is to press buttons following directions sent to him via the monitor. Until one day,
he had been at his desk for nearly an hour when he realized that not one single order had arrived on the monitor for him to follow.
Stanley can, however, hear the narrator, who is attempting to move the story along by providing Stanley with directions.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
The narrator has a set path that they want Stanley to take, but there are a number of moments where you as the player can assert your right to choose and choose not to do what the narrator asks of you.
But at last, he'd had enough of the amazing room and took the first open door on his left to get back to business. Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago.
The narrator obviously expresses his frustration in your attempts to disobey the commands, and there are 19 endings to discover, with an additional 24 endings in the Ultra Deluxe version.
In this game, the baby crawls left towards danger. You click the button to move him back to the right, and if he reaches the fire, you fail.
I'd be honest, I was quite tame with this list. There are a lot more games out there that really try to push the envelope for weirdness. So, you play as a big old floppy cock, and as a cock, you really want to So you need to insert your cock into the arsehole of other cock controlled by the other players who also want to put their cock in your arsehole. Hold on, I've got a video somewhere. Where is it?